The sewage hit the marble tile like a wave of biblical vengeance. Brown water gushed through the pristine halls of the luxury strip mall they built on my stolen land, soaking designer handbags and luxury loafers in a stench that would haunt them forever. The once snooty shoppers screamed and scrambled like rats fleeing a sinking ship, clutching spoiled merchandise as their dream shopping center turned into a septic wasteland. I stood just across the road, arms crossed, boots planted, watching the chaos unfold, calm, silent, and completely justified. After all, they demolished my home to build that mall. And now I was going to drown it in everything they'd flushed at me. Ever wonder what happens when you mess with a rancher who used to design military infrastructure and owns the water rights beneath your feet? I was born on that land. 43 years ago, I came into the world inside a modest, creaking ranch house with wood-paneled walls and a front porch that faced the sunrise like it had a standing appointment with God. My father built it with his own hands, piece by piece, post by post. Over the course of years he never took for granted. He taught me how to fix a fence before I could tie my boots, how to read the clouds like scripture, and how to treat the land like kin. It was the kind of place that made your bones feel grounded, like you didn't just live on the soil but with it. We ran cattle, raised chickens, grew everything from squash to strawberries in that hard clay soil, and watched decades of sweat and patience turn it into something worth protecting. Our family name was stitched into that dirt deeper than any deed could ever explain. The county lines barely touched us. No city water, no street lamps, no neighbors for miles. Just the sound of wind slicing through mesquite trees and the occasional lowing of a calf at dusk. Peace was earned there. And for most of my life, that peace was sacred, until they came. The HOA didn't show up like a thunderclap. It was more like mildew, creeping into places it didn't belong, quiet and slow until suddenly it was everywhere. First came the newsletters, tucked into our mailbox like invitations to a party I never agreed to attend. Then came the polite knocks. "Just checking in on your compliance, sir," from smug faces with laminated badges and self-importance leaking out their eyeballs. I ignored them, politely at first, then firmly. "This land isn't under HOA jurisdiction," I told them. "It never has been. You're wasting your time." But they didn't take no as an answer. They took it as a challenge. The citations started coming in a month later. One said I had too many non-conforming utility structures, which was their term for my chicken coop. Another claimed my perimeter fencing violated visual aesthetic harmony, whatever the hell that meant. They wanted me to repaint my barn to match the neutral tones approved for the gated developments 14 miles down the road. It would have been laughable if it hadn't been so damn relentless. Each notice came with a threat. Fines, liens, even legal action. I laughed, tossed them in the trash. Let them come. I had documents showing our exemption from any HOA jurisdiction. Hell, I had county zoning maps from decades ago with my father's signature on them. But logic doesn't matter to people who think their clipboard gives them the right to rewrite history. Especially not to the woman who declared herself queen of the HOA. Her name was Charlene Huxley, but everyone just called her Karen, because if ever there was a soul who weaponized the color beige and smelled like power and peppermint, it was her. She didn't walk, she patrolled, always in heels too high for ranch roads, sunglasses that looked like they belonged in a mob trial, and a Bluetooth headset she wore like it was a badge. She claimed she wanted to modernize the county, said our undeveloped land was dragging down property values for the growth community. Translation: she wanted our soil paved over and replaced with fake grass and upscale wine bars. She started showing up at county planning meetings, then at zoning hearings, always with a stack of binders and a smirk. People started calling her Madam Commissioner, even though she wasn't one. Yet, somehow, she got a foot in the door at the county development office. The rumor was that her brother-in-law worked for a land use consulting firm in Austin, and they'd been looking for expansion opportunities west of the city. All I knew was the next time I tried to renew my well permit, I was told it was pending review for the first time in 20 years. Something was shifting, and it didn't feel like weather. I didn't see it coming, not the way I should have. I still had faith in paperwork, in process, in the unspoken rule that you don't mess with what ain't yours. But that was the old world. and mine was about to be turned to dust. It happened on a Tuesday. I remember because I'd driven out early to the co-op an hour away to pick up some replacement parts for the pivot irrigation rig. I was gone maybe 5 hours. By the time I turned down the long gravel path leading to my ranch, I noticed the dust cloud. Big, industrial, wrong. Then I heard the engine roars, heavy, loud, merciless. My heart dropped before my foot did. I floored it, came over the final rise, and what I saw shattered me. Bulldozers, 4 of them, excavators clawing at my barn like it owed them money. The porch ripped clean off its foundation, walls splintered like matchsticks. My house, my goddamn house, was half gone already. Crushed timber and insulation spilled out like a corpse gutted in the sun. Workers in hard hats shouted to each other over the rumble, pointing, gesturing, laughing. I slammed the brakes so hard I fishtailed into the oak tree my father planted when I was born. I didn't feel the impact. I didn't feel anything. I just stepped out, mouth dry, eyes wide, fists clenched. A foreman in a fluorescent vest jogged up, clipboard in hand, smiling like I was the welcome committee. "You're on private construction property, sir," he said, like I was the one trespassing. I couldn't speak, couldn't move, just stared past him at the ruins of everything I'd ever known. "We've got all the permits right here," he added. "If you have questions, contact Huxley Holdings. They're spearheading the development." "Huxley, of course, Karen." I staggered forward, kicked through the wreckage. The dining room table was crushed under a slab of drywall. My mother's antique oil lamp lay shattered beneath tire tracks. My father's boots, the ones he wore to his grave, had been flung clear to the edge of the pasture, one turned upside down like it couldn't bear to watch. That's when the black SUV rolled up. Glossy, too clean for these roads. Out stepped Karen. Designer heels, beige suit, sunglasses that caught the reflection of my rage. She walked up to me like she was visiting a zoo exhibit. "This land was zoned for commercial redevelopment," she said coolly. "Your property was a bottleneck for economic growth. You should be proud. You're making way for something bigger." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You destroyed my home," I said, voice hoarse, barely holding. She didn't flinch. "And we've allocated compensation based on the assessed tax value. It'll be deposited into your account. You're welcome." "You had no right. We had permits. County approved." She smiled. "Progress waits for no one." Then she turned, waved to the foreman, and slid back into her air-conditioned SUV like a warlord retreating to her throne. The engine purred as she drove off, leaving me standing in a cloud of dust and disbelief, ankle deep in the bones of my family's legacy. That night, I didn't go to a motel. I slept on the dirt, next to the last intact fence post still standing. Coyotes howled, the stars didn't blink, and in the silence, something in me cracked, not from weakness, but from rebirth. That land was mine. They might have taken the house, but they hadn't taken everything. Not yet. Not the water. Not the network beneath it. Not the knowledge I'd buried with the pipes and the blueprints in the barn floor. I lay there in the dirt, heart thudding like a war drum, and made a promise to the land. They wanted sewage? I'd give them a flood they'd never forget. I woke up on the second morning not to birds or cattle or wind against the siding, but to the sound of idling generators and metal scraping on metal. The bulldozers were still there, crawling across what used to be my pasture-like parasites with steel claws. My pickup was still parked under the twisted shadow of the old oak, and my back ached from sleeping on the cold dirt. But the fire in my gut hadn't cooled. It had crystallized. I drove straight into town that day. Didn't shower. Didn't eat. Just walked into the first lawyer's office with a name I halfway recognized from a billboard on Route 6. The receptionist looked me up and down like I tracked in something unpleasant, but I didn't care. 20 minutes later, I was in a stuffy office, across from a man in a wrinkled suit who smelled like printer toner and passive disappointment. He listened, took notes, squinted at the manila envelope of deeds and tax records I dropped on his desk, then leaned back and sighed like I'd handed him a crossword puzzle without the answers. "Technically, you should have had the right to contest any eminent domain claim," he said, tapping his pen. "But they didn't file it as eminent domain. They filed it under commercial cooperative development. I blinked. What the hell does that even mean? He shrugged. It's a loophole. They used a clause tied to community growth incentives. It allows a private developer to fast-track zoning adjustments if they can demonstrate majority consent from surrounding property owners. I didn't consent. No, he said, and this time he looked uncomfortable. But your signature's on the petition. What? I leaned forward, heat blooming under my collar. He pulled out a scanned document from the file. There it was. My name. My forged damn signature. I stared at it. That wasn't my handwriting. That wasn't even my name format. They'd used my middle initial, which I never do. It was a cheap, clumsy forgery, but it had been enough. This is fake, I said, my voice low and tight. Then you'll need to prove it, he said. Which means a handwriting expert, possibly forensic analysis. If you want to take this to court, it'll cost you— I don't care about the cost. And months of waiting. Maybe years. And even if you win, the mall will be finished by then. I sat there, shoulders rigid. As he closed the file and looked at me with the tired pity of a man used to watching people lose everything with only a handshake and a notary stamp to show for it. I'm sorry, he added, and for once, I believed him. But sorry doesn't rebuild a home. It doesn't undo decades of heritage. I visited 3 more law offices that week. Each one had the same polished sympathy, the same "our hands are tied" tone. By Friday, I was chewing through coffee like it was molasses, and I'd aged a decade in 5 days. Every door closed in my face. County records had been updated. Property titles had been realigned. One clerk even claimed I'd sold my rights to Huxley Holdings 2 years ago, according to a contract I'd never seen. Check the notary, I snapped. Check the witness line. That's not my damn signature. Sorry, sir. It's already been processed and recorded. You'll need to file a motion to challenge, which takes how long? 3 to 6 months, sometimes longer. I walked out without another word. I drove straight to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Wilkins was a man I'd known since he was in diapers. We'd fished together, traded fence wire, even shared a bottle of bourbon the day his father died. He didn't even make eye contact when I sat down. Look, Mark, he started, rubbing his temple. I understand this is personal, but there's nothing I can do. The permits are real. The development's been cleared at every level. Even got state backing now. They forged my name, I said, my voice sharp. That's fraud. It's criminal. Then take it to the AG. But until then, my hands are tied. You telling me you're not going to do anything? Even file a damn report? He sighed, looked up at me like I was a ghost. I've got orders from the county commissioner's office. We're not to interfere with this development. You push too hard, they'll bury you in court costs until you're homeless. I stood up. He didn't follow me out, didn't offer a handshake. Just sat there like a man who'd sold off his spine for a parking lot and a pension. The following days felt like walking through wet cement. I couldn't eat. Couldn't sleep. I sat at the edge of the hill where the old cattle trough used to be, and watched construction crews pour foundations where my garden once grew. Dump trucks full of gravel rumbled over the spot where I'd proposed to my wife before she died. I watched them stomp steel into soil like the land had never belonged to anyone, like it had never loved anyone. One night, I found myself at the edge of the southern fence line, where the sycamore trees lined the creek. I hadn't been down there since my father passed. The air smelled the same, wet bark and cow dung, humid with memory. I saw flashes of him. Tall, tanned sleeves rolled to the elbows, teaching me how to fix a gate hinge with twine and spit when I was 10. His voice in my head, "You don't own the land, son. You take care of it. And if you do it right, it takes care of you back." I sank to my knees, fists digging into the mud. And I broke. For the first time in decades, I wept like a man who'd lost a child. Ugly, heaving sobs that no one saw and no one would ever speak of. I cried for my father, for the barn, for the porch swing that used to creak while I watched the sun set with a cup of coffee, for every root they dug up and every inch of history they flattened. And when I stood, knees shaking, cheeks burning, I was different, cold, focused. There was nothing left to appeal. Nothing left to beg for. But I remembered something. Something they hadn't touched. The water rights. They were mine. Had been for over a century. Signed over in a mineral clause my great-grandfather filed when the ranch was carved out of the original Spanish land grant. The county had tried to buy them decades ago, offering a pittance. We refused. And those rights included access to the entire subterranean irrigation system that used to feed our crops and cattle during drought seasons. Miles of piping. Rusted but intact. Unused, but not forgotten. And that's when the idea came, not all at once, but like a coiled snake unspooling in my mind. They built their mall over our aquifer. Laid their foundation over the old pressure junctions and concrete cisterns that still threaded through the bedrock. They didn't know, but I did. I helped my father dig half of it. I knew every pump, every valve, every switch buried 6 feet deep. I knew how to turn it back on. And I knew how to feed it a cocktail that would make every manicured storefront smell like the underworld's outhouse. They wanted to flood me with lawyers and concrete? Fine. I'd flood them back, with everything they flushed down my throat. From that moment on, I stopped being a victim. I stopped taking meetings. I stopped answering calls. I started drawing diagrams. I started making lists. I started planning. Not revenge. No, this wasn't about anger anymore. This was about justice. And the next time Karen Huxley set foot on my land, it wouldn't be to gloat. It'd be to run. It started with a map, an old one, yellowed with time, hand-drawn by my father in the late 70s, stored in a steel box beneath a floorboard in the smokehouse. He labeled everything with pencil and permanent grit. Main valve do not touch. South feed tilted grade. Pressure switch primes hard in winter. It was more detailed than anything the county ever archived. I ran my fingers over the faded ink, tracing the veins of a forgotten system that once brought life to this land. Back when droughts were a death sentence, and water wasn't just sustenance, it was salvation. The mall had been built over 3 primary branches of that system, 2 for irrigation. One was converted, by my grandfather himself, to handle livestock runoff and compost slurry. Which is a polite way of saying it was engineered to move a lot of crap fast. The lines ran deep, coiled like serpents under the soil, made of cast iron and reinforced polyvinyl, pressure rated for far more than the average suburban pipe. They'd been dry for years, sleeping under 20 feet of packed earth and history. But the bones were still good. All they needed was a pulse, so I gave them one. I started with the primary feeder junction near the eastern slope, digging at night with a manual auger, using headlamps and blackout tarps. I disassembled the overgrown housing, cleared the inlet ports, replaced 2 ancient backflow valves with modern high-torque units I ordered online, under a fake company name, Westland Greywater Solutions, LLC. Sounded official enough. My hands bled, and my back screamed, but the sound of a pressure coupling sealing shut again after 30 years. That was gospel. I worked alone at first. But soon, I brought in people I trusted. Quiet folks. The kind who don't talk unless there's a fire. Wade, a plumber I served with in the reserves. Ramon, a retired irrigation contractor whose sense of humor was filthier than the pipes we cleared. We didn't speak much while we worked, just nodded, sweated, and built vengeance from the roots up. We pulled 80 yards of clogged line from beneath the old cattle barn and spliced it into the mall's sub-foundation runoff duct. They had no clue that their high-end drainage system, meticulously designed to redirect water into a holding basin, was now cross-connected with the dirtiest piece of infrastructure west of the Pecos. Next came the diversion tank. We set it up underground using an old septic drum I bought for scrap and retrofitted with a dual-pump bypass capable of shunting liquefied waste from my remaining livestock pens and compost heap into the restored lines. I fed the system from every legal and not-so-legal source I had. Greywater. Rain catch. And the kicker? I leased a nearby vacant lot under another shell LLC and installed a faux testing unit that nobody questioned because I made it look like a municipal project. Nobody questions guys in neon vests with clipboards and fake mustaches, especially if they look bored and underpaid. The system had 3 activation points, each labeled in Sharpie. 1. Barn valve. 2. South Switch. 3. God's Finger. That last one was wired directly into the mall's main plumbing junction. When it flipped, every pipe beneath their manicured floors would erupt with what I'd spent 3 months collecting. But I didn't rush it. This wasn't about a burst of rage. This was orchestration. It had to be perfect and public. I needed witnesses. I needed news crews. I needed the HOA to be standing front and center, smiling in their blazers, scissors in hand, just before the smell of justice filled their nostrils. Meanwhile, I worked the town like a ghost. During the day, I dressed like a contractor and walked the perimeter of the mall's construction zones, nodding at guards, answering questions with rehearsed authority. Water pressure readings, backflow inspection, subsurface line harmonics. I made it all up, and nobody blinked. They just waved me in. I even ate lunch with one of their engineers, a young guy named Cal who loved to talk shop and hated his bosses. He didn't notice when I stole a copy of the final plumbing blueprint from his clipboard while he bit into his sandwich. They built the mall with a living infrastructure model, meaning the lines were meant to expand as new shops connected. All that meant to me was more exits for sewage. Beautiful. Perfect. At night, I returned to my land, let the dogs loose, checked the pumps, and listened to the low hum of something coming to life beneath the earth. The system groaned. It pulsed. It waited. So did I. There were close calls. A drone hovered over the field one night. I spotted its red eye blinking like a lazy devil and ducked into the shadows behind a hay bale. I shot it down with a .22 the moment it crossed my fence line, repainted the parts, used the motor to power a sump switch. Another night, one of Karen's bootlickers, an HOA compliance marshal named Bert, trespassed through my back gate after dark. I watched from the shed window as he crept through the fields, his flashlight bobbing like a drunk firefly. I didn't move. I just let my German shepherd, Rusty, handle it. Bert got too close to the old compost pit, and Rusty caught him mid-shin. Didn't break skin, but it left a mark. He ran off howling, pants wet, pride shattered. The next morning, Karen sent me an email. Please be advised that aggressive animals are in violation of community standards. I replied with one sentence. So is trespassing. She never wrote back. As the mall neared completion, I started timing my system. I measured flow rates, pressure curves, and fail-safe delays. I ran simulations with dyed water, watching colored foam spray from the irrigation heads I'd rerouted through their decorative fountains. It was poetic. The last piece was psychological. I needed them overconfident. So I disappeared. I stopped replying to emails, took down my protest signs, mowed the fields like nothing had happened. Let Karen believe she'd broken me. She even sent me a Christmas card. Best wishes for a prosperous new year. I framed it and mounted it above the God's Finger switch. The date was set, grand opening of the West Valley Lifestyle Plaza. Ribbon cutting at noon. Media outlets invited. Local officials in attendance. A speech scheduled by Karen herself, who somehow talked her way into being named Community Development Liaison. The very same woman who called my ranch an eyesore. In a planning meeting now stood at the peak of her delusional empire. That was fine. The higher they rise, the deeper they sink. All I needed was to flip a switch. One valve. One command. And every vanity boutique, espresso bar, and 30 candle shop would be awash in the liquid legacy of what they tried to bury. I stood at the edge of the field the night before it happened. The wind was hot, the air thick. I looked up at the stars and for a moment, I thought of my father. He'd never have gone this far. He believed in forgiveness. But me, I believed in boundaries. And they crossed mine. Tomorrow, the land would speak. And the smell would tell them exactly what kind of grave they dug when they demolished my home. The morning of the grand opening, the sun rose blood orange behind the ridge, like even it knew what was coming. I was already awake, didn't sleep, just sat in the loft of my barn, boots planted on old cedar planks, watching fog curl over the valley like a silent warning. Below, the mall stood gleaming, smug in its final form. All chrome and concrete and soulless rectangles. The parking lot was lined with Teslas and Suburbans. Banners whipped in the breeze. "Now open," they read. "Elevate your lifestyle." Across the front plaza, a red ribbon stretched from one mirrored pillar to the other, as if sealing the tomb they didn't know they'd built. People were everywhere. Local press trucks jockeyed for position behind barricades. A brass quartet rehearsed beneath the awning of a day spa. Karen strutted out of a black SUV like she was royalty arriving for coronation, beige power suit, clipboard in hand, sunglasses the size of frying pans. She greeted the press, flashed her plastic smile, and gave a speech that could curdle milk. "This mall," she said, "is a symbol of progress, a tribute to the growth of our community. We took something outdated and turned it into something vibrant." I stood on the hilltop across from it all, just past the north tree line, eyes locked on the moment. In my hand was a rusted switch box, coated in fresh paint, wired to hell and back, and stamped with 3 words in black Sharpie: "God's finger, live." I waited. Let them finish their pomp. Let the mayor shake Karen's hand. Let the camera drones take their sweeping glamour shots. And then I took a breath, one last lungful of dirt and honesty, and flipped the switch. At first, there was nothing. Just wind, flags fluttering, and Karen raising a pair of golden scissors above her smug, Botoxed face. Then it hit. A deep, distant thunk, like the land groaned from its gut. The decorative fountain behind the cafe shuddered once, and then exploded in a geyser of thick, dark water that reeked of compost, cattle waste, and time. Screams. Actual, blood-curdling screams. Shoppers fled as the brown wave fountained 15 feet into the air, splashing down in foul torrents across patio tables and open storefronts. The music cut out. The speakers sizzled. Then, from inside the mall, came the unmistakable sound of pipes bursting. Floor drains erupted like geysers, one after another, cascading sewage up and out with relentless pressure. Toilets backflowed with violent force. The tile floors became slip and slides of bile. It poured from vents, oozed from light fixtures. Ceiling tiles sagged, then gave way, raining sludge on shrieking shoppers. Karen stood frozen, her beige suit rapidly turning a sickly, soaked brown. She looked around wildly, as if someone had dumped a bucket of hell directly onto her ego. I watched her slip, heels skidding out from under her, and land face first in a puddle of her own ambition. The cameras kept rolling. A local anchor screamed into her mic, trying to cut the live feed as sewage splashed onto her heels. Security guards rushed to block doors. Too late. Wastewater poured through the HVAC, the fire suppression system, even the artificial waterfall wall they'd installed in the atrium. The mall was drowning in its own stolen land. A security chief radioed for help. "Mainline failure. Total infrastructure collapse." Someone shouted, "Turn it off! Turn it off!" But they couldn't. The pumps were buried, hidden, automated, drawing on gravity and pressure, not electricity. There was no switch for them to hit. The only way to stop it was to find the core valve, deep beneath the development, right where the heart of my ranch used to be, and that would take days. By then the damage would be irreversible. The scent alone was enough to evacuate half the town. Families fled the parking lot like it was on fire. The mayor threw up into a trash can. A teenage girl tried to film a TikTok and slipped, face-planting into a pile of half-liquefied mulch. Beautiful. Cataclysmic. Perfect. I filmed it all. Drone overhead, GoPros hidden in trees. Multiple angles. All synced to a live feed titled HOA Karma, The Flushioning. Within 30 minutes, it had 800,000 views. By the end of the day, 2.4 million. That night, it was on every news outlet from Fox to Vice. Mall opens into raw sewage disaster. Owner filed environmental claim months ago. I filed that claim myself. 3 hours before the disaster, I walked into the county office and submitted a full report under my real name. Cited the history of the land, the concealed water rights, the contamination risk from unassessed construction. I claimed I'd tried to warn them that the system had ruptured under pressure from their development, and I had the documents to back it up. Blueprints, flow maps, water samples. I even tossed in a fake invoice from Westland Greywater Solutions that listed unauthorized storm line tie-ins. By the time the state health department arrived the next morning, the mall was sealed off with hazard tape and biohazard signs. Dozens of people had reported illness. 5 lawsuits were filed before breakfast. Karen, of course, tried to pivot. This was sabotage, she claimed, standing on live TV, streaked with dried sludge and fury. The land was rigged by a disgruntled former property owner. The reporter raised an eyebrow. So you admit you stole the land? Karen froze, swallowed, blinked. It was legally obtained through community development incentives. With forged signatures? No comment. The HOA board scattered like rats from a drowning ship. Emails leaked. Turns out Karen had bypassed 3 inspection steps by bribing a city official with gift cards and wine memberships. One of her assistant developers, under pressure from the press, confessed on camera. She said the old guy would die soon, that it didn't matter, that it was just a ranch. The court case moved fast. Public pressure, viral footage, political firestorm. My lawyers, paid for by a coalition of environmental watchdogs and one surprisingly generous cattle syndicate, filed a countersuit. Illegal land seizure, fraud, environmental negligence, and reputational defamation. I stood before the judge 3 months later, clean-shaven, suit-pressed, and finally whole again. Karen showed up, looking like a ghost. Thin, pale, trembling. She took the stand and wept. Said she never intended harm, that she just wanted to help the community. The jury didn't even need the full deliberation period. In less than 2 hours, they returned a unanimous verdict. I was awarded $5 million in damages, another $1.3 million in attorney's fees. The mall was condemned, demolished, razed within the year, concrete torn up, foundations pulverized, all of it trucked off and dumped in some other forgotten county. And the land? It came back to me, quietly, unceremoniously. Transferred under a court order and signed by a judge who barely looked Karen in the eye. She resigned from every position, moved out of state. Rumor says she tried to start another HOA in Arizona. I hope she enjoys the Scorpions. Me? I rebuilt. Not a mansion, not a smart home, just a porch, a kitchen, a wide stretch of pasture, and enough room for 2 dogs and a good shotgun. I installed a new fence, restored the trough. And one morning, nearly a year to the day after the flush, I sat down with a hot mug of black coffee and watched the sunrise break over my land like it was bowing in thanks. The grass was green again. The birds were back. The wind sounded like forgiveness. And me? I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I was free. Peace doesn't come cheap. But when it's bought with truth, grit, and sewage-laced revenge, it tastes a whole lot like justice.